that the next webinar series is actually going to be held on the third Thursday of November. Typically, we're the first or second Thursday. We're going to do that on November 18th at 7 p.m. And we're going to make that a fireside chat, just kind of a recap, the ins and outs, the down and dirty, and kind of go over the highlights of the conference. So if you can't make the conference and those aren't up and running, please join us for a discussion on what we learned and how we can celebrate the success of the first annual HHRF conference. So that'll be November 18th at 7 p.m. So very excited tonight to be able to host this HHRF, the board, and with Molly Sweeney's leadership and Octavia Brown's leadership in the Education Committee have really set forward an incredible opportunity for people all over the country and internationally to be able to learn about this important field. So tonight we actually have one of our very own, Mike Tomlinson, who will be presenting, a former HHRF board president. Dynamic speaker. So get ready, sit back and enjoy the show with Mike. We'll be laughing a lot. I don't know how he makes research so interesting, but it is really fun. We're going to start out with Professor Andrea Sook, who is going to give us kind of a background inside perspective. My name is Tara Mahoney. I'm the CEO of Equine Immersion Project and really honored to be a part of HHRF and this mission. So Andrea, why don't you take it from here and we'll let you start the ins and outs.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. It's good to see you. Let me share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Oh, looks
wonderful.
Good.
All right. So I didn't want to have this up as everybody signed in because you didn't sign in to see me talk tonight. You signed in to see Dr. Mike talk. So I'm only going to spend a few minutes with you to start you off with how to find these research articles, these research publications. And if you're not part of a university or college, it can be extremely daunting. And let's be frank, really scary and expensive when you start looking and seeing prices of these things. So I thought we should share out a few ways to find the research for free and an easy format. So one of my favorite formats is using Google Scholar. Specifically, if most of us are very familiar with Google. However, Google has a separate platform called Google Scholar, and it is focused on a free search engine, if you will, dedicated to scholarly publications. So research, things that are going in peer-reviewed journals, dissertations would all be put onto this site. What's really amazing though is this site lets you set up alerts for free as long as you have a Gmail account. So this way, if you plug in any words that you are interested in, it will send you a free alert as soon as new publications and research comes out, and it notifies you. To do that, I have it set up here, but I thought it would be just so much easier to show you because so step-by-step directions might make it seem more complicated than it is. So here's the Google Scholar homepage, and quite simply, oh, now I've lost the mouse. There it is. Okay. The three lines up at the top left-hand corner, if you click on it, there's a little tiny box and a choice for alerts. By clicking on alerts, you can create an alert for whichever account you're assigned into, and that is the account that it would also email. So you can type in things like equine assisted therapies, you can type in veteran horseback riding, anything that would be in an interest area that you have, you would just create an alert and it will show up for you. And you're going, okay, hopefully this is something of interest that is super easy peasy for you. What's really super though, is then as soon as you have a new publication or a new research article that comes out, it automatically emails you. So this one was done in August. They had this new therapeutic horseback riding article come out. Super awesome, but I will show you even a more recent one that just came out, I think it was last week. And it shows you a few more on animal assisted interventions, hippotherapy. And so some we can see absolutely would align with potentially what we're interested in, and some may not, just based on what the article is referencing. But then you can click on any one of these and get more information about it. So for example, clicking on the first one, it gives you the full name of the article, the authors who wrote the article, which journal it was in, and it will always provide you a short abstract, a little bit about what you're going to learn from the article. But buyer beware, because off to the side, it shows you those prices that I warned everybody about. And those are insane. Do not pay those. Please, please do not pay those. My little tip for the trade, when we are entering in for a new alert, try to use a few main words to really concentrate what the search is going to reveal for you. You can set up multiple alerts for different areas, but please don't pay for those articles. If you are extremely interested in an article that was sent to you, do a little Google digging to find out more about those authors, those researchers. Information is usually listed based on who their employer is currently, and just search out their email addresses for their employers. The majority of time, researchers and authors have the ability to send out a free copy of their publications and research when they are directly asked for it. So if you spend the extra few minutes to search them out, you can save yourself a lot of money. So again, I hope that was helpful, and I will stop my share now and turn it over to the star tonight, Dr. Mike. Take it away on how to assess the journals once we find them.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let me share a screen here. And let's pick the right one. Okay. Now, am I sharing the correct one? Can you see the thing? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here this evening. I appreciate your logging in to take a listen to this. What I want to have you get out of this is how to look at an article quickly and decide whether you want to read it, investigate it further. As she said, don't pay the price, but you may have to do a little work. But let me give you some tips and tricks about how to look at them very quickly to decide whether it's important to you. When I put together this presentation, I realized that it starts out very easy and gets harder and harder. So what I did was I created a PDF of the entire PowerPoint. So you do not have to take notes during this. You can listen and learn, and certainly put down whatever notes you personally want, but every single slide is in the PowerPoint that was sent to you in the PDF. So the other thing is I welcome questions while we are going along. I am a practicing veterinarian. I do work on the Olympic horses quite frequently, do a lot of events. You can read that in your spare time. This webinar is to tell you how a practitioner looks at it. You may be a researcher, you may be somebody who creates this. I'm going to tell you how the other side works. This is how somebody who uses the research looks at it. I am a doctor. I am a user of the research. I do not create research. So one little quip just to get you started. I had an anatomy professor who told me that I must name every single artery, every nerve, every muscle, the insertion, the origin, everything. And then when I got to surgery, the surgery professor said, huh, you can name it and then cut it, or you can just cut it. It's a whole lot quicker just to cut it. And so that's kind of my same method of looking at the journal articles. You can dig really deep into every one, but really it's much quicker. Look at the important parts of it first. and then decide. Don't spend hours looking at an article that you later decide isn't worth your time. So the first thing you want to look at is the title. Is it something that interests you? And Andrea gave you a good way of getting titles that have your keywords in them. I encourage you to use a service such as Google Scholar so that you do get articles that at least start with a title that you need. The most important thing for you is, can it be applied to what you do? Is it something that is going to change your practice, what you do? Okay. Next thing to look at is where it was published. And you go, well, you know, it was in a peer-reviewed journal. These days, there are probably an equal number of predatory journals and well-known journals. And the pay-for-publish journals are out there in spades. Some of my favorite predatory journals recently have published on metachlorians, how those have been very beneficial for Star Trek. There have been lots of really interesting ones. So definitely look where it is. I'll show you how. You also want to be sure the publisher is a member of an industry group, such as the Committee on Publication Ethics or Open Access Scholarly Publication Association. Or is it from an organization you know, such as did Autism Speaks create this article or publish this article? The other thing to look at every journal is it clear about the type of peer review that it uses? Many of the predatory say they have peer review, but won't tell you anything about it. And sometimes it is just simply their dog. If they didn't eat it, then it's get published. So next up, look at the authors. Are they well known? Where are they from? And the key thing is to look at who the corresponding author. Every paper will have a corresponding author. If they don't, it's not a real paper. And look where that corresponding author is from. And that would be your starting place. And I'll show you some useful ways of doing that. The next thing is, do any of the authors have a conflict of interest? We'll come back to that later, but that is a huge part of the papers. Next thing, you want to look at the funding. Who paid for this? What are the potential economic biases that papers have? And believe me, whoever pays for it generally gets the best press. It is not usual that somebody pays for it and it comes out and says that drug doesn't work. Look at the recency. Look how long ago it was published. See if there are other newer studies that have been published since then that counteract it. Science these days is published, and then a few years later, the opposite is published and it's newer. So years ago, we learned that we cannot eat eggs because it will kill us. And then we learned that we have to eat eggs because without them, we can't live. So be sure and read the latest fad. And then look at the abstract. I think everybody knows that the abstract is where it is the summary. It is where we will find out the quickest information. Does the abstract truly say what they did? One of the key things is the article's hypothesis. And just in case you don't know, the hypothesis is the question which the research paper should be asking and then answering. Every research paper should start with a hypothesis and then answer that. If they start with a hypothesis and then answer something else, that is a huge red flag. And there are a lot of articles that do that. So, did the study clearly address the issue? Was the issue properly defined? Another big thing to look at in the abstract is the sample size adequate to make a statistically significant conclusion? That's a lot of big words that basically say, were there enough people in that study? Because if you're doing a study on 3 people, you're not going to have anything statistically significant. Okay. Do the results align with the hypothesis? That's really the bottom line. Did they answer the question that the title says they're going to answer? If they answer anything else, be very wary. Once you have done that part, do you still want to consider this article? Are there enough people in it? Are the researchers biased? Is the hypothesis something that is important to you and what you do? If you go through all that, is it going to change the way you practice? Is it going to change the way you think? If so, that was the easy part. Now we start on the hard part. Are there any questions? I want to be sure you guys are all awake. No question? Okay.
Mike, one thing that just came up in the chat was from Judith. Qualitative studies do not usually pose a hypothesis, nor do they generally have a large sample. Any chance you could speak on that for a minute? When
in my experience, I'm trying to say politically correct. In my experience, every research has to start with a question. Even qualitative research should have a question. And that is what they should be answering in the paper. And what I'd love to discuss is, why would a qualitative study not have a question that they're trying to answer? They're okay, a question is different from a hypothesis. No, a question and hypothesis should be the same thing. A question, a hypothesis is a form of a question. And the hypothesis is the question you are trying to answer.
Thanks, Mike. All right, let's get back to the.
Well, no,
the chat. Let's keep on chatting about it. But why don't you keep on going with your presentation? I just thought
okay.
I'd in there. You're right. It is really interesting.
I would love to talk with Judith and see what she feels differently. I mean, I want this to be an open discussion. I don't want it to be a lecture. So tell me how you feel differently about a question and a hypothesis, Judith.
Well, hypothesizes a specific result, whereas often the central question in qualitative research is, how did people feel when such happened? That's not usually considered a hypothesis. Hypothesis is, we predict that people will feel better after they interact with the horse, so they'll be more calm. That's a hypothesis. The question is, how do they feel? We usually make that distinction in research methods courses, but you have a different, I'm just saying that's a different way of
No.
looking at it. Okay.
I appreciate that. And I guess that is, the problem is that I come from a more, an older, more jaded way of doing it. And I actually believe you have the more modern method of not being biased in your hypothesis. So I can certainly agree with you in that it is possibly better in some qualitative not to say, I believe they will do this and then prove it right or wrong. I come from a more pure scientific, which is you must prove or disprove a hypothesis. So I agree with you that the more modern way for some of them is to do it your way. So thank you. We're all here to learn. So there's no, let's all discuss this together. So as you said, there are many types of research. Some people break it down to just quantitative and qualitative, but that doesn't work. There are so many different types of research. You can have a clinical trial. You can have a case study, which is one, okay? A case study is important if it shares new ideas. N is one, but that doesn't mean you throw it out. That just means you realize it is N of one and go, wow, okay, that's an interesting idea. It's not proven, but it lets you see a new or novel way of doing things or a novel outcome. So don't throw case studies out. A systematic review, meta-analysis. Some people love to do meta-analysis. Retrospective studies, they can have N in the thousands. Lit reviews, all of these are types of research and all are valid and should be looked at. Each type is different and should be judged by different criteria, okay? There is a basic set of fundamentals that every paper should provide, but you need to judge each type differently, okay? While randomized controlled trials are gold standard, there are many times when you cannot use randomized trials, okay? Where it can be used, it should. Where it cannot, then you use the next most rigorous design. Okay. Any questions on that? Yeah. And I see in the chat that N of one may be the only option. Absolutely. That happens more than we care to admit, especially with rare diseases or novel approaches. So do not discount them, look at them and assess. If they are saying, well, we treated the common cold and we used N of one, then you know that doesn't work. But if they're saying, this is the first time we've ever seen this, here's a case study on it, you want to definitely look at that. Okay. There are many different types of publications. Okay. And it used to be that people would say, only look at peer-reviewed journals. The issue is that there are so many predatory pay-for-published peer-reviewed journals that you can't just use that moniker anymore. You have to review and look at each journal differently. There are also referee journals, trade journals, convention proceedings, there are commercial publications, editorials. They all provide information. They should all be looked at differently. methods. This is, I am making a very, very big topic into one slide, okay? There are entire university departments on methodology, okay? So I have drilled it down to just 5 or 6 bullets, but know that this is huge, okay? And so is the population clearly identified and characterized? Are there clearly stated outcomes? Are the statistics clear and well described? In this field, inclusion and exclusion criteria are huge. You can totally skew the numbers by who you include or who you exclude. How was the data collected? How was the data managed? How was the data analyzed? Okay. Keep in mind that the methods is something you could spend your life learning about. Really do work on it. Okay. The key to the methods is that it should be strong enough, thorough enough that somebody else could totally repeat the study based on the methods section. If you go through the methods section and you're not bored, then they did not put enough material in there. The research design. One of the key things for me is, has the researcher justified how they designed it? Do they tell you why they designed it that way? Is it an appropriate design? Is it a controlled study? What kind of study is it? Is it appropriate to achieve the objective? When there's N, a very small N, you have to use a different research design than when there's a huge N. And I hope everybody understands when I say N, that's the number of participants. So, the research design must be appropriate for the study. Some researchers like to use the exact same research design for all their research, and it doesn't always work. Remember that all these slides are in the PDF that was sent to you. These are just key points. This could be an entire 4-year college degree. So don't know that we're glossing over some very important things, but it is intended to get you to think about it when you are looking at a paper. So, selection bias. When a researcher, no matter how hard they try to eliminate all bias, every research is biased in some way. Most researchers try to do their best to eliminate it, mitigate it, minimize it. So in this, did the researcher explain how the participants were selected? Did they say why people chose to participate? What is the incentive? Might the incentive compromise the findings? Almost as important of who was selected, who was not selected. Was there a volunteer bias? Okay. This is just a glossing over, but selection bias is huge. You always want to look, how did they choose who's going to participate? The smaller the N, the more likely there is selection bias. Just a side note, publication bias. We are finding that papers tend to be presented and published if they are statistically significant and change the current thought. And if you think about it, most publications don't want to publish something that tells you something you already know. It's not exciting. So that's why you find a lot of papers out there that are controversial and very few that are very, yeah, I already know that. So.
Can I ask a question, Dr. Mike, on that?
Yeah.
So in the field that I'm in, there's been a lot of discussion about publishing things that didn't work so that there's a database so people don't replicate things that don't work. What are your thoughts on that, and what have you heard from your field about that topic?
It is imperative that if you do the research and it says, that didn't work, don't do that again, let me know. I need to know when it doesn't work. To me, it is just as important to know what doesn't work as what does work, because I hate doing it again. They go, oh yeah, we did a study on that last year and it didn't work, and it still doesn't work. So for me, it is so important that what works gets published, what doesn't work gets published, what is statistically significant gets published, and what is not statistically significant gets published. I just want to be sure if it's not just statistically significant, they publish it and say, this showed me nothing other than this doesn't work. Here's what I can do to fix it, and goes on that way, instead of saying, well, this was amazing. And I'm going to show you one paper that is absolutely amazing on depression in rats that is that way. So. Sampling bias. How were they selected? And really, was there randomization? Was the sample size discussed? Were the samples that were selected, why were they selected? Why were the ones not selected? And I'm going to kind of harp on how important it is to know what was not selected as much as selected. In many types of research, you cannot use controls. Okay. We want controls if we can, but if they don't have controls, make sure it's the type of research that couldn't have controls. But if they could use controls, make sure they did. Make sure, just as the selection of the target group, make sure the selection of controls are done also. Selecting controls for the field we're discussing here is one of the most challenging things. Who gets treated, who doesn't get treated? Are they their own controls? Are they same age, same gender, same, how are you matching your controls? So. Is there a relationship between the researcher and participants? And so often we see research where the researcher has a prior relationship with participants. And how does that influence not only the formulation of the questions, but the data collection, the recruitment, etc.? I'm not saying if all of these are part of it, I'm not saying throw it out. I'm just saying notice it and take a good note that the results may be influenced by that bias. Okay. As I said, things get smaller and smaller because there's more and more and more to the farther back you go. Measurements. Were they used appropriately? Are they subjective? Are they objective? Were the proper variables asked? Was there pretest so that all the testing was done correctly? This is why I put it in a PowerPoint so you can read that and actually read it. I know on the slide here you might not. Was blinding used when it is feasible? And many cannot, but those that can, if you blind both the researcher and the participant, then you get some really interesting data. One of the studies I read was when you blind both the researcher and the participant, you are far less likely to have statistically significant results. And that alone says a lot about why blinding works. Okay. So, lots of things to look at on this. I don't want to read them all to you, but when you are going through a paper, it might be interesting to read those and kind of check them off. Results. Was there a large effect or was it very small? Some studies will have a large effect, some studies will have a small effect. In some cases, a small effect is celebrated. So be sure that your treatment effect is appropriate for what you're trying to achieve. Did they consider all the variables? Were the correct changes measured? Sometimes what happens is they do a full ANOVA, a full correlation of everything, and realize that the color of the walls in the treatment room are more important than the drug that was given. But they published the color of the room. So be sure that what they report on is what's important to you. And then, was it statistically relevant? And were the side and unintended outcomes mentioned and explained? Because almost every study, halfway through you go, oh, I never realized that, and has something else. Be sure that they have explained those, mentioned those, included those. Okay, statistical analysis. The good news is that we have statisticians, medical statisticians, research statisticians, etc., and they do these, excuse me, these things inside now. The bottom line from a user is I want to know that they use the right test and that they got something out of it. And all of these questions basically tell me that. But when you are looking at it, you can ask these questions, and these are not statistics questions, these are procedural questions. Such as, did any participants drop out? We started with 60 and 47 of them answered the questionnaire. Okay, what happened to the other 13? Why didn't they answer the questionnaire? Are those the statistically significant 13? Why are they no longer in there? And most studies will tell you why. If they don't, you need to kind of question, okay, what's going on here? Are the p-values reported? For me, I'm male, I love pictures. So when I see a good graph, that really helps me understand how it works. Okay. Questions on all these intricacies? And then assessment of the conclusions. Is there a clear statement of the findings? Do you have to read it 6 times to understand what they're trying to say? maybe they're not trying to say it. Does it directly relate to the original question? And were all the participants and outcomes accounted for? Are the conclusions justified when you look at the results? You always want to compare the results to the conclusions to make sure they match up. So.
Mike, we had a really good question. Let's see, from Nancy is explain the p-value.
Oh,
Can you explain
okay.
it a little bit?
How about if I do that when I go through the graphs and the charts, and it'll be much easier to see.
Great,
So,
thank you.
Yeah. So now we've gone through the technical part of it. Once you have done all of that, the question is, does it change the way you practice? Let me now bring up a few articles so you can see some good articles, some bad articles, how we go through them. And what I need to do is share this, stop share 1 second. And share screen. Okay. Do you see the Journal of Clinical Medicine article? Okay. There, it says now you can see it. In this is one that was sent to me. I appreciate that. And let's just say that you are interested in equine assisted activities and therapies. This will come up in your feed. And the first thing you want to do is read the title, make sure it's the right title and it is what you're interested in. The next thing you want to do is look at where it is. Oh, I don't know if I've done this correct. If I click on this, what it does is it brings up, sorry, I think I need to share it differently. Let me share screen. Let me share this. Okay. What it does is it brings up the journal or the publisher of the journal, and it tells you about the journal. And things you want to see would be, are they paying people to do it, etc.? What is their affiliations? And I know, oh, I've got the chat on top of it, so it made it quick, so I couldn't see it. You want to be sure that the journal is indexed. Many of the predatories are not even indexed. You want to see what their ranking is, the reviewers, and then I know I saw on here affiliations. The bottom line, you want to really review your journal and make sure it is a true one. This one's in PubMed, impact factor of 4.2. Does everybody know what an impact factor is? Okay, I see everybody saying yes. I can also say BS. The impact factor is the number of citations that the articles in that journal receive and how widely cited it is. Okay, to put it in layman's term, I know that's not quite it, but basically how important are the articles in that publication. And so the impact factor is becoming very important. Anybody else care to clarify that and make it more accurate?
Dr. Mike, I was just going to add, I think part of it also depends on the field. So like, I think medical journals overall have a very high impact factor just because medicine goes throughout the world. And so like one of the journals that I'm connected to with my field, it's the top in special education and it's the highest in education overall. And its impact factor is only 3, but for our field, I mean, it is our major resource. So I think that's also, impact factor, I think, is critical, but also to also look at it as, well, if it's the only journal in rehabilitation or this type of therapy, it might just be a smaller field that also affects that impact factor.
Extremely good point. Thank you so much. I tend to focus in the medical field, so my viewpoints are going to be a little skewed from what some of the others are. So I appreciate that. Let's go back to the article itself. And in the article, you notice that you can look up where these people are from. And we don't have time for me to go, but if I look up the Integrated University Hospital of Verona, you find that that's a very well-respected hospital in Italy. It's one of the highest ranked hospitals there, and virtually everybody is from there. So that's a good place. You always want to see who is the corresponding person. And the corresponding on this one with the asterisk is Marco. The other thing you can do is click on his Orchid. Orchid.org is a listing of people who publish. And it tells you all of their publications that they have done. Anybody who has more than 1 or 2 is going to be on Orchid. So definitely use that and see who these people are. Okay. Yeah. In the comments, I see that there are some ways that people can inflate their impact factor, et cetera. And believe me, every single metric that we use to evaluate these things, as soon as it becomes a good way to evaluate it, the predatory journals figure out how to get around that. So you have to actually do some research and look through these things. So I really appreciate impact factors is just one of the things you should be looking at. So there are many others. Getting back to the article, here is the abstract and the things that you can really quickly look at would be, what is their question? How many were in it? Here's 15 participants, 20 weekly sessions, okay? And then I want to see what their conclusions are. And it's rather interesting that they say, here's what it did do, and here's what it did not do, which is always important that they report both sides of the story, okay? Then the other thing which I often do is skip straight to the end. There's probably an easier way. There we go. And in the end, They tell you about the authors. What did they really do? Because you're going to find they'll have 10 authors and only one of them really did anything. In this case, these are the ones who conceptualized, these did the methodology, these did the validation. This was a very well done contribution. The people actually worked on it, okay? Funding. This research had no external funding. So you know that the money came from the hospital, and you have to ask yourself, okay, that's where the money came from. What is their bias? Okay, why would they want this? It is a research hospital, and that's what they do. So I actually put this one pretty high up. The IRB statement, you really would like to be sure that every study you deal with has an IRB statement. If it is a type of study that would need one, okay? There are many, many studies that don't need one, but if they do, you want to be sure they have one. And then the next thing would be the conflicts of interest. Okay, who worked for the drug companies, who didn't? And it's pretty cool when there's only one, and that person, if you go back and see what that person did, all they did was supervise it. So project administration. You go, okay, this one's not as biased as most. But you see how you would go through that. Now, you asked about, I'm just scrolling back up through. This one, I don't think gave any real charts, just a whole lot of data. Yeah. Let me switch to a, yeah. Pebbles put in the thing. Look at all the other articles which are cited by this one. Certainly, if you like this one, you're going to be able to find 2 or 3 others that you might be interested in. The sheer number does not indicate how good or bad the article is. But when you read through it, you can actually see whether they are relevant to it and support it or refute it. So let me switch to another journal. Let me show you just a different one. Is it still being shared? Did the right one share, or do I need to switch it? I need to switch it, don't I? Okay, let me share. All right. Here is one that my research brought up. And I do a lot with acupuncture and believe in it greatly. I also am very aware that sometimes the things are not quite as they seem. So when you research where these people are, they actually have pretty good provenance to the people. And go back. Sorry. The corresponding author is from one of the clinics in Japan that is fairly well known. But when you go through this one, what I really wanted to show you, as somebody asked earlier, what are p-values? What is the probability? What are the error bars, the bars above and below? In this, these are the statistical significance showing. And here's the 2 different groups, different treatment. You see that the averages aren't that different. The error bars are very similar. These 2 groups are not statistically different. Okay, pretty easy to see. Then they show you this graph, which shows how the various groups reacted to it. And my first look at that graph goes, that doesn't tell me anything. They all look about the same. But then what they do, and the most important one, is they show you the three: the no treatment, treatment with immobilization, and the treatment with acupuncture. And they say these have a probability or a P of less than 0.05. These are less than 0.01. These are totally different. And I'm going, don't BS me with the analytics. I can look at this and go, somebody in this group could just as easily have been in any of the other groups. Yes, you can find a statistical analysis of this to make them statistically different, but we can all see that the error bars, you could be in this control group and be in any of the other. It would be very simple to go back and forth. So what they have done is use some very good statistics to show that their research did something, when it's pretty clear that their research showed that it didn't matter whether you immobilized them or acupunctured them or really did nothing. They were still depressed. And then when you go through it, if that doesn't throw you off, the most interesting thing for me on this one was how they determined whether the rats were depressed or not. And okay, I'll give them that you can decide which rats are depressed, but how do you make a rat depressed? Tell me he hasn't paid his taxes? I mean, what are you going to do to depress the rats? What they did in this study really did not tell me that they could tell whether rats were depressed or not. So this is an example of one where the title looks interesting, but then when you really start looking into it, you go, these guys didn't prove anything, but they got a great paper out of it and invited 6 of their friends to get on the masthead with them. So look at these things from several different viewpoints. The other thing which I thought was rather interesting on this one is the disclosure statement. They have no conflicts of interest, no financial. It's like, really? That's pretty concise. And most of the journals which I read are much more elaborative than that. Where did the money come from? You know, why did all these people do it? Did they all do something on this one? Remember, the other one listed exactly what everybody did, exactly where the money came from, etc. So you can see the difference pretty quickly between a very rigorous journal and a slightly less rigorous journal. So just to show you an alternative way of doing things, let me share another one. Here is one that is published by an association, in association with a journal and a publisher. So this has a well-known publisher, a well-known journal with a well-known association. So you go, okay, that begins to have, you look at the title and you go, wow, this is kind of important to me. You go, I have no idea who Gustavo is, but David Frisbee, I've known him for 30 years. So, you know, you want to look at these things that way. And then, as I said, you want to go to the end. And here you see the conflicts of interest, who contributed, that it was done ethically. And here is the orchid for the person, for Gustavo. So generally, when they throw in the orchid, you start realizing, okay, this is fairly reputable that they actually have an orchid on there. But I just bring this one up as a different one. Their abstract is split into the background, objectives, methods, materials and methods, etc., results, conclusions. So what this particular publisher is doing is trying to make it very simple for the practitioner to digest this. Okay. Let me show you one other one and see if anybody recognizes it. And I shared this one simply because this is published in Lancet, which is one of England's really good journals that everybody accepts. This study has fairly well-known authors, you know, there's quite a few of them, from a fairly well-known place. But when you start looking at the methods and the selection, this paper is one of the huge causes of methodology being studied so thoroughly these days. Because this paper is one of the foundations of correlation proves causation. It is one of them. The logic in this paper is that we studied 500 people who had headache, and they all took aspirin. Therefore, aspirin causes headaches. Okay. This is the one that studied 12 children, and the only thing that they all had in common was that they had all been vaccinated. Therefore, vaccines cause autism. And this was published in Lancet. So even if it's a good journal, you need to read it, understand it, and figure out how they reach their conclusions, who was included, who was excluded. Okay. Are there any questions? I think we have gone through this world very quickly. I've tried to provide a few examples, but I should go back through. Anybody who's been watching the chat, what have I missed?
Well, I think we've all decided that we want to develop a DSM manual for rats before we reach another rat depression, but
Good.
like, this is so fun because, you know, you're right. You know, it depends on so many different things. And I love how you, in the beginning, gave us the slides of, you know, what we should follow, what we should look for, and then just walking it through. I love watching how your mind kind of really breaks it down as you're looking at an article. So it was a good glimpse into the inside track of how you really decide that. And Andrea, I love the insights that you shared about, you know, even where to access it, right? So, you know, the general public might not always have access to a university or EBSCO host or any of that. So this has been really, really helpful. Maybe, I know we're a little over time. There's a lot there. Would we like to just, if anyone needs to get off, no problem. We really understand, we appreciate your time and we're so glad that you joined us. If anyone would like to stay on, and Mike and Andrea, if it's okay for you to kind of take some questions, certainly want to open that up, or even open up a discussion. If people want to, either raise their hands or take off their mute, we're super excited to be able to welcome that.
I had a question.
Thank you, Robert.
I published an article under MDPI. It was in Animals Journal, so it's free to download. If you Google on it, the first place it shows up, various digital libraries captured it and offer it for download. The first place it shows up is National Institutes of Health. So how does that happen? What's the meaning? Is that a good sign or what?
Oh, it's a fantastic sign. NIH is fairly reputable. And the only thing to understand about that is that they try to capture as much as they can. And so it's not curated the way many others do. But NIH is fairly reputable.
Great question, Robert. And if you'd like to, share what the title of your article is in the chat, certainly all of us would probably love to take a look at it.
Type it into chat.
Yes, please.
Yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Anyone have any other insights or thoughts? There were some great ideas in the chats. I think Andrea was able to really jump on that and answer some other ones.
And keep in mind, this is from my standpoint, from what I do, how I look at them for changing the way I do surgery, the way I dispense drugs, etc. And it may be very different than how you work through it.
Molly, ask your question about the horse about relationship with the horse.
Yeah, Mike, on the Equine Welfare Task Force, we've been having a lot of discussion about the bias. Is there bias not only between the people that are doing it, but with the horses? Like if they're horses from a totally different place are moved to a new center with volunteers they don't know, is that a bias against horses that have been riding in the same place with the same people and the same volunteers and the same therapists for years and years and years? Does it make any difference?
And the answer is potentially it could make a vast difference, but it is a variable. And it could have a positive bias, it could have a negative bias. And really what it means is you have to investigate further how they were selected, why they were selected, why were some included, some excluded. And you do the same for the horses in this field as you do for the patients.
Thank you.
To follow up on that, we're a mobile program. And so we go to farms all over the place. And it's really interesting when we partner with the people who are facilitating. They have their own stories and, oh, watch out for Buddy the horse. He pins his ears when you put the halter on, or this one who does that. And we really do pay attention a lot, what the client will hear, what the volunteers will hear, and then what our staff starts to have biases of, is that horse just having a bad day, or does it really mind its ears? And it's really fascinating going to, working with tons of different horses at tons of different places with everybody has their own story. So I think that's a really good point, Molly, and something that certainly warrants more investigation. I find as a clinician, I get that bias with the researcher participant bias, where, I really come at it with this open heart of please work, please work, please work, instead of, so a lot of times I have to remove myself that, if I'm going to be involved, I'm not the treating clinician who already has the relationship.
Well, we have a theory on the task force that the better the health and the mental health and everything with the horse, the better their well-being is, the better results you'll get with the clients. So funding research, we cannot tell them what they need to do with their horses, but we want to educate them about what to be looking for in the types of horses and how you choose them and all the rest of it.
Well said.
Yeah, selection criteria of the horses is of paramount importance, just the same as selection of the participants. So, and really the idea with this is, here are a bunch of questions to ask. I want to get everybody thinking about the research and not just accepting the research. Any other questions, comments? Then,
I have a quick one. Can I make a quick one?
Yeah.
It was really wonderful to hear you say that it's important to know things that don't work as much as things that do work. And I really totally agree with that. But did you ever try to publish an article where the intervention didn't work? I mean, so I think I totally agree with you. I just, as a researcher, I'm mostly a researcher, that, you know, it just seems like a fruitless effort. Anyway, just wanted to make that comment.
I couldn't agree more. And that is the publication bias that we all have to be aware of. And I appreciate you're trying to go against the flow, but yeah, it ain't gonna happen. So thank you. Yeah. Thank you everybody for being on. The lights are flashing. I have to let you go. Appreciate your being on tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you stay tuned for the next one. That will be on November 18th, Thursday at 7 p.m. And we will certainly follow up and let everyone know how the conference goes. Hopefully we can see you all at the conference. Last day to register is tomorrow. We're at 80 registrants.
Registration.
So we're really looking forward to seeing you all. Thank you so much for joining and have a great month.
Thanks, Mike.
Oh, thank you.